Today we're going to talk about Democrats' surprise announcement on a reconciliation package and the perfect way it went down, and what Republicans did to retaliate. And I interview U.S. Senate candidate in Missouri, Lucas Kunce, about his reaction to Missouri's Republican Senator Josh Hawley scurrying away from the mob on January 6th, the impact that overturning Roe has had on voters in Missouri, and his reaction as a veteran to Republicans voting against funding for veterans suffering from illnesses related to burn pit exposures. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. So, holy shit, Democrats actually pulled a pretty baller move this past week. Here's the quick rundown of what happened. Democrats were trying to get the CHIPS Act passed, which would offer funding for the semiconductor chip industry here in the U.S. It's being sold as a way to make the U.S. competitive with China, and it's got bipartisan support. But Republicans said that the only way they'd vote for it is if Democrats don't pass a reconciliation package. Democrats were like, sure, no problem. And I mean, let's be honest here, no one was holding out hope for a reconciliation package. We've been screwed over by Joe Manchin more times than I can count. I don't think anyone was sitting here thinking that this time was going to be the time, right? Like, we've all come to terms with the fact that Build Back Better wasn't going to happen. So, fine, no reconciliation. Democrats introduced the CHIPS Act in the Senate. It passes 64-33. And then, like, minutes later, Joe Manchin releases a statement about an agreement reached between him and Chuck Schumer about a $740 billion reconciliation package. Like, holy shit. Wait until the second that Mitch McConnell and the rest of the Senate Republicans lose their leverage and then immediately introduce the bill. Maybe the stealthiest move that I'd ever seen Democrats pull in the Senate. And I say this with every caveat in the world because we've been at the beginning of reconciliation talks before only to see them fail, but we can at least bask in this for a moment. Okay, so first off, what's in the bill called the Inflation Reduction Act? Vox has a great explainer on this that I would highly recommend reading, but here are some of the most important provisions. First and foremost, it's the biggest effort to combat climate change in U.S. history. It would cut climate pollution by about 40% from peak levels in 2005, offer tax credits and rebates for solar panels, wind turbines, EVs, funds for forest and coastal restoration. It would penalize fossil fuel companies for excess emissions. And by investing in clean energy and cutting climate pollution, it'll help ease inflation since high energy costs from fossil fuels are responsible for about a third of the inflation that we're seeing right now. Aside from the climate provisions, it would extend ACA subsidies that were supposed to sunset this year, and they'll go into 2025 instead, meaning that millions of more people will qualify for free or subsidized health coverage. It would allow Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices. Those negotiations will focus on 10 drugs to begin with and eventually expand to cover 20 drugs, and those drugs will be determined based on a number of different criteria, including how expensive they are. It'll also cap the out-of-pocket drug costs for seniors at $2,000 a year and require companies to offer rebates to Medicare if they try to raise the cost of a drug at a rate that's faster than inflation. It funds the IRS by another $80 billion, which is expected to raise over $200 billion in added collections. And those are by people who would have otherwise cheated the government out of their tax dollars, which are mostly the ultra-rich. It includes a 15% corporate minimum tax on corporations with profits over $1 billion. And it closes the carried interest loophole, which currently allows you to treat part of earnings as capital gains, which get taxed at 20% instead of being taxed as income, which obviously is subject to a higher tax rate. Does this bill have everything? No, of course not. It is a far cry from the original Build Back Better. But all of its provisions are good, and it includes climate, which we desperately need. This is a good bill. All right, so back to the Senate. Republicans were so pissed off that Democrats introduced this bill that even though the Senate had just passed the CHIPS Act, the GOP was like, shit, now we have to stop the CHIPS Act. And so they immediately started whipping Republicans in the House to vote against that bill. They weren't successful considering 24 Republicans still voted in favor of it, but they did manage to get 187 Republicans to vote against it. The party that wails about China on an endless loop voted against a bill that would make us more competitive with China. And they didn't stop there. The PACT Act was also up for a vote. That's the bill to allocate funding for veterans suffering from illnesses related to burn pits. That had already passed the Senate with 84 votes in June that had to come up for a vote again because of procedural issues. Republicans blocked that bill too. They blocked a bill to help our own veterans suffering from illnesses and dying of cancer, all to punish the Democrats. And look, I don't have to explain why opposing bills funding both veteran care and the domestic semiconductor chip industry is a really, really stupid move by Republicans, because now they get to wear those political losers around their necks like albatrosses until the midterms. But also, here's the craziest part. This whole temper tantrum was over a reconciliation package that would lower prescription drug prices and combat climate change and reduce inflation. I mean, just on inflation alone, Republicans have spent God knows how many days wailing about that issue. And then when finally presented with a bill to combat exactly that, they're like, if you try to pass this bill, we will attempt to sink the entire domestic semiconductor chip industry and deny health care to our own veterans. Like, in other words, they don't actually want inflation reduced. They want inflation to stay so that they have something to whine about. They'd rather have a talking point for midterms than deliver even an ounce of relief to the American people. Remember that the next time they run on one of their daily segments on Fox News having fainting spells over just how difficult it is for Americans. Like, I'm sorry, but you don't get to walk around for months on end and blame Biden for inflation, which, by the way, is plaguing the entire world, and then throw a massive temper tantrum at a bill that's intended to literally reduce inflation, and then expect anyone to take you seriously. All this does is prove that Republicans don't want solutions, they want problems to campaign on. So the next time you hear a Republican clutching his or her pearls over inflation or high gas prices or whatever the issue of the day is, just ask what they're doing to fix it. Guaranteed you won't get that answer. To listen to my interview with U.S. Senate candidate in Missouri, Lucas Kunce, about his reaction to Missouri's Republican Senator Josh Hawley scurrying away from the mob on January 6th, the impact that overturning Roe has had on voters in Missouri, and his reaction as a veteran to Republicans voting against funding for veterans suffering from illnesses related to burn pit exposures, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel.